There's this idea that was really like eye-opening for me when I went to that conference for Žižek in Prague. There was this guy, his name is Michael Hauser, I think. I'll validate somewhere with his picture. And he talked about interregnum, which is this idea of something old that cannot die and something new cannot be born. It's like this middle space. I have personally a theory that I've been sharing around with like random people that I meet in life, like just talking to them about, what I feel is the reason why we're all collapsing with anxiety, which is preempting the end of the, oh my God, this is already going in all different directions. But a video on existential crisis, I think this is suitable. Today, I'll be sharing a few quotes from Žižek's The Courage of Hopelessness, and it has to do with identity crisis. So there are going to be 3 parts to the video. The first is the given and chosen community, plot twist, people don't exist. The second is the loss of ethical substance, how men are perpetually adolescent and women are prematurely mature. And lastly, we'll talk about the solution or the last resort from fear to angst, inevitable, involuntary self-transformation, or not self-transformation, and then you just are left with angst. Hi, my name is Wani. I am a philosophy student at La Sorbonne, and I'm currently in a video conference cubicle at La Bis, which is our library, because it is too cold in my apartment. It is beautifully snowing in Paris, but yeah, one tiny heater cannot fight the power of nature. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was from page 239, and it is under the chapter, well, all of this is under the chapter of the populist temptation. I will not be sharing the quotes here because this is a book that was written in 2017, so there's rights and stuff, but I will be sharing the quotes on my Substack, and it's transformed enough that I don't think it's illegal. But essentially, if you were interested in actually seeing what I wrote exactly with the quotes, or you want to read the quotes while watching this video, it is available there. But let us begin. The idea is that the starting point of emancipatory politics should be the suffering and injustices concretely experienced by ordinary people in their local life world, home, workplace, not abstract visions of a future communist or whatever society. Incidentally, although the new digital media seem to open up the space for new communities, the difference between the new communities and the old life world communities, just a small note about the word life world, in this book that I'm currently reading, which is A.Honneth's Leben an Unbestimmtheit. In English, I think it's like the pathology of individual freedoms. It has this word called lebensweltlich, which is life world, and I think there's a lot to unpack with what it means, life world, but that is just something to keep in mind. These old communities are not chosen, I am born into them. They form the very space of my socialization, while the new digital communities induct me into a specific domain defined by my interests and thus dependent on my choice. Far from rendering the old spontaneous communities defunct, the fact that old communities do not rely on my free choice makes them superior to the new digital communities, since they compel me to find my way through a pre-existing, not chosen life world in which I encounter and have to learn to deal with real differences, while the new digital communities, dependent on my choosing them, sustain the ideological myth of the individual who somehow pre-exists a communal life and is free to choose it. The main thing that I just want to bring our attention to is this idea of like old and new communities, especially this idea of digital, which is abstract. So there's this idea that, when you're born into a given community, it's not digital, right? You come and then you have like parents, or you have, if you're religious, like you have a church, you have like a place, a concrete place of being. And what I find, it's a librarian. So this box is literally for visual conferences, and I don't know if they can tell the difference between like recording a YouTube video and a visual conference, but no one's using this, and I pay for a CFEC. It's like you're always breaking a rule because there's so many that you don't know about. Why is it that we are going through so much anxiety in terms of our identity? So here it's saying that before we have a concrete identity, in a sense, because we have a plot twist, and the other, we have indoctrinated ourselves by choosing to join a new community, new digital community. The difference here being twofold. One, if you look at the words, well, you can't look at it, but if you heard the words like learn to deal with real differences. So when you cannot choose, you have to deal with real differences. Real differences in this way, it's very Hegelian in terms of like, for you to actually elevate, for you to actually transform yourself, another tangent just came to mind, for you to actually transform yourself, there is this sense that you need to be put in opposition with something that initially seems different, but then you realize that you're part of it, and then you know, elevate. There's my video on Hegel's Transcendental logic if you're interested, but essentially the idea here is that if you choose the community, you already align with it and you're in it because of similarities, and you don't have a contradiction or an opposition that would enable you to surpass yourself. So usually when you're faced with life challenges that seem to be in your way, when you surpass it, that's when you evolve. And the tangent that I was thinking about, and this video is going to be really long, is that there was this Uber driver that I spoke to. I love talking to people everywhere, whoever's willing to talk to me essentially. And he basically said that the thing that gets people out of bed is this possibility of self-evolution. And obviously we're talking about economics and capitalism, which is also a big part of this video. But the idea here is that if, you know, the state or administration or taxes are done in a certain way that encourages you not to evolve, and in this case to earn more money so that you can have a better standard of living, because working before is about this capacity for you to earn your living, earn the right to enjoy or be able to enjoy your life, is no longer it seems no longer available to us, as in, like, you know, who can actually buy a house now if you're not like a nepo baby, etc., etc. Also the Hegelian sense of, like, you know, if you transform the world, you make your interior the same as your exterior, then you find home, because the world is a reflection of yourself, a mirror to yourself. The other thing, and this is something that I kind of discussed in my series on Schrödinger, about learn to deal with. And the idea is that you don't evolve just as time passes. The example that was given was like a bicycle. Over time, you can still see that the basic structure of two wheels and like a frame to hold the two wheels and its motion to bring a person from point A to point B has not really evolved or changed. The idea is that you can only evolve based on your environment. So if you put yourself in an environment where you have no challenges, there's no evolution, even if time passes. It's only when you're faced with life, and I called it like hard mode, that you're able to consistently activate, practice, evolve, find new ways, fine-tune, master certain capacities of yourself based on what is demanded from you from your environment. The other side would be sustain the ideological myth of the individual that pre-exists communal life. Again, with Hegel, there's this question of, like, does word precede subjectivity? You know, but here I would say it's much more of a comment, not so much about the pre-existence of the individual, but more of the capacity for the individual to conceive itself as separate from community. So how it is that, like, you know, you can choose your community that you are within, but I think it's much more of like choosing a segment or a fragment. It's like a person who's, I know this sounds so cliche, but, like, you know, if you're on TikTok and you're in your own bubble, or I don't know, X, whatever it's called now, it's like you are self-reinforcing this part of the world that you choose to be a part of, and then everything else, you know, you put in like headphones and you try to ignore the world. I think, like, there was this one self-help person that I listened to in a podcast who said, like, you know, if your commute to work is very unpleasurable, find a way to add pleasure into things. So, like, you know, buy a coffee, all these like consumeristic things to like bring hedonistic pleasure to yourself to make do with, you know, your circumstances. I think that is definitely not my vibe, but it's just this idea of, like, you know, we believe that we can slice and totally design our experience of the world based on the communities that we choose to partake in to reinforce how it is that the world is or should be. And then when we confront the other half, we're just like, oh my God, this is so absurd. You're crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm crazy. We're all crazy. So that is the first part, but here's the transition. While this approach undoubtedly contains a very big grain of truth, its problem is that, to put it bluntly, people does not exist. So what does this mean? Does not exist in a concrete way. So people is an abstract idea. If I'm looking outside, it's because people are passing. So, okay. This idea is not to be taken as an abstract theoretical statement about the inconsistency of multiplicities, etc., but as a thesis referring to a quite concrete, even experiential fact. People is the false name for the social totality of which we draw all aspects of our lives. In our global capitalism, the totality is abstract, invisible. There's no way to ground it in concrete life worlds. In other words, in the global capitalist universe, a concrete experience of being a member of a particular life world, with its customs, living links, forms of solidarity, etc., is already something abstract in the strict sense of a particular experience that obliterates the thick network of financial, social, etc. processes that rule and regulate this concrete particular world. So I wrote a note which is, how is it that the abstract dominates the concrete? I have like a live that I used to do. If you're interested, there is this passage in the Sublime object of ideology that talks a bit about like Marx's conception, or he actually uses Marx's conception to explain how it is that fetishism, or how it is that we no longer associate things in terms of the concrete, so like me and this person in front of me, but more about the relation between a person to a person. So how it is that I associate with this person is this abstract relationship rather than the person in front of me. Just to finish up with this idea of abstract and then come back to it again, is something that I found on page 251 on capitalism. So let's recall the basic premise of the Marxist analysis of capitalism. Capitalism is a reign of abstraction. In it, social relations are permeated, regulated, and dominated by abstractions that are not just subjective abstractions, abstractions performed by our minds, but objective abstractions, abstractions that rule social reality itself. What Marx called real abstraction, real abstraction, these abstractions are part of our social experience of capitalism. We directly experience our social life as regulated by impenetrable mechanisms that are beyond representation, which cannot be embodied in any individual. And then there's more at the back, but again, like, I'm not Žižekian. I really appreciate reading him. But anyway, I'll just finish this phrase, which is, even the capitalists who replace the old masters are enslaved by powers beyond their control. Something to give you possibly a better framework into this idea is something that I talked about in my video on the Sublime, which comes from Žižek as well, from the Sublime object of ideology towards the end. The interesting thing about this is that in him trying to show the difference between Kant and Hegel's conception of the Sublime, he needed to demonstrate the difference between how they both conceived the in and of itself, the absolute in and of itself. One, for Kant, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if you have a different understanding, is that Kant, for him, it's just that in and of itself, the absolute, it is beyond representation. So it's there, but it's beyond. However, for Hegel, it is nothing. The in and of itself, like, beyond its representation, is nothing. So what can we say about the idea that capitalism is reigned by abstraction? The real abstraction is that it is an abstraction which, it was interesting, I read my friend's paper, and this idea of abstraction or abstract is something that is not subjected to the real temporal space. So something that technically doesn't exist in concrete reality because it's outside time and outside of space. However, the real abstraction is just, in my opinion, this idea that we are experiencing real consequences of something that's abstract. There is a real consequence between how it is that I experience my relationship to another person, a camarade, a professor, or the Uber driver, and that's the crazy thing. Like, now it's like, I don't see this person as a person. I see this person as my professor, or like this person as the Uber driver, and no longer as like, and you call them by their name and you're like, is that really your identity? Just like a really quick tangent, but like, and I wrote this tangent somewhere else as well. But I had like this meeting with my director. The idea is that he said that even our individual selves is not transparent to ourselves. And I said, like, but this is only if you see yourself as a non-developing, evaluating, or changing target. So he's like, oh, you believe in radical change, like le devenir radical. And I'm like, I didn't say anything, but I just looked at him. Well, I didn't look at him. I was just like, I'll just let him say whatever he wants to say, but that's not what I said. But that being said, instead of going into this crazy, fall into what it is that identity means concretely, it is just to show that in this structure anyway, how it is that we identify ourselves is based mainly on relations, based on the abstract. And we're going to see in the second part how it is that we're losing even this. We're losing our relationships to other people. So if I define myself, or, as philosophy has progressed, and this is just my point of view, there's this like comedian that I watched recently who's just like, he said something a bit spicy, and he just like kept saving himself by saying like, mon point de vue, like, this is my point of view. If we have been growing more and more in terms of social sciences, at least, to identify self as in relation to other. You know, think of Foucault and think of the institutions, and how it is that if we're losing this concrete understanding or experience or shared experience of what it actually means to have a relationship to another person, because we are no longer a part of a concrete, this is where we lose ourselves, a concrete objective network of people, because we're now from the talk that I was saying before, the subjective, it was like, I think like the what is it called, the super order, the superstructure, the symbolic order. I'm not a Lacanian, I just read a lot of Žižek, but it was the idea of like the symbolic order is disintegrating and there's not one to replace it, and we are breaking down into many different small pockets of digital communities. So this was written in 2017. I spoke to the speaker after, and he recommended me a lot of really good books by Žižek and Badiou. And I guess this is going to be a good transition, or I hope it is, into the second part of the video, which I will actually decidedly now make it a separate video, which talks about Badiou and how it is that we are actually losing our sense of self because we are no longer, or we no longer recognize a symbolic order or an objective order that gives us a way to actually relate to each other in a complete or total way that is not separated by choice. Yeah. Okay. I hope this was helpful. I'll see you in the second one. Bye.